아래 당도 가상 알시바레스나 제름 지게 되는 마 아주에 아니 대바 카레스나 아주게 아니 지게 띵게 대화 동함이 되어봐지 대화 되고 그래서 대화 되어봐야 안지겨 세티기 안티기 되어봐다 안 동화 세야 아니 개와 치마이나야 아니 지게 띵 먼저 고봉 톱디 띵들 디기 주비야 아니 인델에 사바는 거 코에 동화 타다를 주시 탈비 고봉 토야 야 랑은 지부 랑점만 뭐 심지어 탐제 되나래 안에 심지어 탐서 산요 고봉 토야기 아니 디다 심지어 탐지기 동화 세세 심지어 나 코에 동화를 주시야 산지선을 꿰봐 꿰야지다 저기 되바티 저기 되바티 디레스다 되바티라 맞아 고야지라 지게 rapting 다 먹고시 두신이가 말했어 안디 샤삼 두신에 안 가르스 두고레스네 야 안산이기 저기 라미 아줄라 산유 준비되는 마 손지 코로나서 냠len 제제 냠len 림바 심규두에 탑람 안 셈미릭 안디스 뇨모리티스 뇨모바티 메바소 고레 다셈 상보이 티리도 곰고레스 탑라 덴바텔바 아주긴 야보지 냠len 제바이나 안되나 아주 미유된다 되게 시간 툭툭 그래서 지금 가산도 수지로.
Good morning. So yesterday we started to look at this brief text by Lama Tsongkhapa, who at the outset states that all of us have as an underlying motivation behind everything we say, do or think, the wish to attain happiness and to be freed from suffering and problems. And whilst it tends to be the happiness and the problems of this life that dominate our minds, so what we are really looking for is actually a happiness that is lasting and stable, that is never punctuated by even a moment of suffering. Reflecting this way then, one gives rise to a wish to attain good rebirths in lives beyond this, so as not to fall into the suffering lower realms. Moreover, when one reflects more deeply, recognizing that samsara in its entirety is pervaded by suffering, one gives rise to a wish to gain freedom from the suffering realms of samsara, and thereby gives rise to the determination to gain liberation from samsara. Reflecting further still, one can give rise to the deepest, the most profound motivation, which comes about independent on one's prior cultivation of the determination to emerge from these suffering realms of samsara, and one recognizes that others too yearn for lasting happiness, that at this fundamental level we are no different. Here one cultivates this determination where one takes responsibility to guide others to attain a state of liberation. And to do so, to fulfill this aspiration, one commits to becoming a Buddha for the sake of others. So this then is the most profound of goals, the goal of becoming a Buddha for the sake of others. And to achieve all of these various goals, the Buddha taught the method of transforming your mind, the various steps of training that will lead to a radical transformation of who we are, our very way of being, our very way of thinking. So this comes about in brief, as we looked at yesterday, through developing wholesome karma, strengthening our familiarization with wholesome ways of thinking, and eradicating the afflictions, first reducing and eventually eradicating the afflictions. This was the method taught by the Buddha.
디네게다 냠는 야고 제바들이야 안주기 띵이 차네 냠는 야고치 띵 야고시고 오래 제사다 안주 띵 다던주 루틴에서 다와게던 주로 주사위 띵 개발전이다 근데 띵 냠는 제 띵 약수 디레스 다주기 띵데레스 제사딘 다주기 띵 대야 아니 제 야고전에 두고 걸마도 아니 야고면은 다주기 띵 두고 마 제사 단주기 띵 토에 귀디 아주 룽아이 순이 제된 수준수야다 되네 진배 냠내지야 쇠배 냠내지야 되네 준주 좀야 되네 몰람 답이야데 두서 제솔을 때네 아주게스 단주 루틴 토고레스 제산디네 상아주 드링기 루틴데 아주 루틴데 단주 루틴레 개왕아 망아주 되니기 귀하고 사버게 개위레데 사발레 되네 드링된다 야고 톱도요레스 대산디네게 톱이 뒤텔래야 안 드링 아주게데 인생고 되지 냠내지 에릭되게 다 아주게 니나 첸나 뒤장 고급까지 요가질이야 배수에 지는 냠는 제고래스 다 되네 그 고급 유디급이야 냠는 마체바체 안 지금 가지고 두 sla성반데 배 가지고 용을 해야다 안 배지 소소소기 어때랑 고헛당만 하시 차고래스 딜레 고호 대외지단 딜레 경험체지 요 말이스 대상은 저기 덴델딩 고가 약부 여바텔라 아니 배수에 지신 냠는 제고래스 가사다 두신 슈버랑서
Further, yesterday, we looked at that in order to attain freedom from suffering, this is a process that will require ongoing spiritual training for lives to come. So we need to ensure that we attain excellent rebirths again, like we have in this life. And to bring about a further precious human rebirth, we have to accumulate those required causes, because a rebirth such as ours didn't just befall us, it didn't come about causelessly, it came about in independence on numerous causes, on specific causes. So those causes were fivefold. The ethical restraint, where at the very least we restrain our physical behavior and our speech, but ideally also our mind. Restrain our behavior, the threefold behavior, within the confines of what is ethical. Moreover, cultivate a generous heart, a patient attitude, and enthusiastic perseverance. And these four then are rounded off with prayer. So these are the causes that we each accumulated in lives previous to this, and now we are experiencing the results of that. Recognizing that this rebirth has come about in dependence on those causes, we commit to utilizing what remains of this life, to cultivate, at the very least, to cultivate similar causes again, and ensure we do not waste what remains of this opportunity, but utilize this life well. Continuing with the third verse. If you are lazy due to being distracted by today's chores and tomorrow's tasks, you will not achieve what you could have. And if it is powerful yama that leads you to your next worldly abode, how great will your distress and despair be then?
Lelo yungo reje ben denja sangja lelo yengurnes chezada nyamne chema do ba lelo wangi ane chige chik dushine nyamne che de parche de yungo lelo yungo res.
Yesterday we came to recognize this precious human rebirth that we've achieved and its great potential. Therefore, what the wish arises to practice well. But this is easy to say, not so easy to do, because we have obstacles to committing our life to spiritual endeavors. And a primary obstacle is mentioned in the first line, and that is laziness.
Jamad chigis, sign to a chigis, and did chick to Shinang Lelo Chene, and the dealer Jawang I see Lelos or Dang as a Jawa Chungzaru, tell Otangadi Tao, the Disana, and didn't chicken as I understood Odanga Cam Roji, Chick Dido, and Disana Chick Chayam chicken as a bit. That Angele, Lucian Azuki, the Nikin, Naming a Lagaro in the Sangas and the Chase, on the Laga cohort in Yelia, the Lagache, the church again, Yamlijet, Jamachi, Jetus and Shasha Vaina, and the Chig, the Gasore, Church and Yamli, Jehagi, Dovadi, Malevro, Dovaligo, Jehagi, Jedu, Donigi, Maleva, Maleva, the Garsana, the Lagati Cell Towels in Beshanda, Jawa, Shandalepa, the Dovachuk, Geoje, Dovadi Malevache, what Jema Pasha, Danger, Sangja, Sangji, said 디링 제스투사 말에 안 제마지는 상이지긴 상이도 어디다 제마지가 로 제마지기선 두신 바샤지 바바바샤신 두신 제이마디베 삼로틸리고레스 딜레로레스 디기 삼로티기 하나 저기 바시 냠네제 바시 디레스 영규네스 영세들 오자와디 딩아디 자와디니엘 제고도 내가 디니엘 차고도 삼제 두신 레가들 영제는 레로지 직자왕 두신 레로 이기고레제레.
Looking at the first line, if you're lazy due to being distracted by today's chores and tomorrow's tasks, so laziness arises within us in various expressions, various guises. Laziness refers to engaging in, for a particular reason, not engaging in what has meaning. In other words, cultivating the wholesome causes that will lead to excellent rebirths, liberation, and enlightenment. So this is the meaning of laziness in the context of Dharma. And it arises in different expressions. Primarily are the two, where one places an exaggerated value on today's chores and tomorrow's tasks, seeing these various activities that consume so much of our time and our physical and mental energy as having a value that surpasses what they actually do. This leads to our life being consumed by these activities. And a second but related expression of laziness is that of, well, I have all these other things to do and they are quite important. So whilst I know I need to cultivate the Dharma within, not today. Not until this project is finished, not until this stage of my life has passed, later. And in this way, we procrastinate and delay. So this is how our life tends to be consumed, filled and busy with a variety of tasks that have no real meaning, and delaying accomplishing what does. And this is how our time and our energy gets consumed.
레로직 가르치 모르시네. 양식이 랑래 예비 레로서데. 지산데 오다 녜디 냠내지 녜 중고 말에 녜 신고 말에 녜 투고 말했으면 소소소게 마 통충충 쇠시네. 오다 녜지 투고 말에 디베 냠내디 베깔레 하보레 녜디 신고 말에 녜 중고 말에서 소소소게 바 안에 지금 직 통중 충충 마수에시네 뉴메르 삼다제 안딩이 레지 개념는 제지 되어마이바디 삼로디 공고와 딜라 안에 지게 라라 니빌레 로세 데네게 삼로 코도 어데 녜지 투 마데게 검유토 마가디 지칼레 카그레스베 데네게 삼다에도 아니 디체 제념는 제디 제하게 되어바디 리고 말에 제 제니 마 제게 삼로디 리고 말에 메말디 제 레로레스 데라 라라 니빌 레로세 다디 간줄이야 지게 데네게 숙천불리고로 왔다 어데게 용 말해서야 되나 마칼레 카그레스야 어데 내신 말해서야 돼 딩이디 야고 마전에 아직 어데 가서래 뭐서버 책을 선배 삼다지 되게 아니 저기 냠는 다다 제마도 제마도 받리고로 어디서 안 자왕한 신게 그래서 라는 예비래 로세 어두신의 레르기 계시는 거 저기 냠는 지알야 바시치고래 지래.
In addition to these two expressions of laziness, the one being the distraction to activities of no real value, and secondly that of procrastination, there is a third expression of laziness, and that is a lack of self-belief or a lack of self-confidence, which takes the guise of, I cannot do this. This is beyond me. Cultivating habituation to a particular way of thinking, breaking habituation to other ways of thinking. This is too difficult. This is beyond me. This is a third form of laziness. And it's an expression of a lack of self-belief. We're thinking that this is for others to do, the great and the good. It's beyond someone like me. So this too is a laziness to be on guard for.
제사당 안zul이야 레로르베 지금 최제에게 냠렌체야 바치 시쇼데 레로레 제사 레로 리고레 어두스네 레로 용고레 스파시시고레제 제가 되는 게 레로 제제 바시 치여도 레로 제제는 기회 자와 마루도 하는 것은 데모 주바라서 내가 저기 된다 게시부 주요여 바디 된다 주투고 말이지 그래서 당아도 세디기 디기 주요하기 규 개와사 사고 말에 얘네 개와치 몽원도 고고 토야기 규 안텐텔에 디기 주요 규디 개와사고 말에 탈바다 잠시 김고 고고 토야 규 사고 말에 얘네 무도시네 제가 데모 주바시데 진이 된다 디시 야체모 주요 된다 되게 샤사 주요 규디 아는 가서 사고 마사바서 된다 주고 말에스
Laziness is the major obstacle for engaging in the Dharma for those who have encountered it. And through laziness, now we come to the second line, you will not achieve what you could have. One will, through laziness, one spends one's life largely in distraction, striving to achieve pleasures which are brief and then they pass, or overcoming problems which in reality are insignificant and minor, as well as procrastinating, delaying what one at least intellectually recognizes is important, or believing that it's too difficult for one to change one's own mind. So these expressions of laziness, when they dominate, as they so easily do, it leads to one not achieving what one otherwise could have, the accumulation of causes for further excellent rebirths, the causes that will lead to liberation and even enlightenment.
데네게다 냠len 데네게 레레 온게 냠len 마제오도 셀하데데 아니 먼저 가지 가르쳐서는 데네게 냠len 마제 때네 두 사데데 갑라데네 덥친치다 제데다 나주게 시에기 시송 시에기 뒤수들이 용을 해서 시에기 덥친치다 세 덥친세 시와디 덥친부를 해서 덥친세데 데 시에기 뒤수들이 용도 관계장 가투요 말해서 지면비야 가투요 말 상기얘기 가투요 말 소소기다 마봉이데 다 코라당 같이 옆에네 유변저 당시에 가투요 말해서 시위 뒤지디 내용 봐서 리디갑라 제상 관계 가투면서 그것도 첨부 덮쳐서 누가 첨부 시고 덮치셔야 돼. 배 덮쳐야 돼. 덮친디니 치다 덮친 치다 내려도 내시도 거래야지 시야 내용을 제상 디네자 저기 유딘텔에 고갑 유디 갑리야 레로 원도 제제 냠는 마제바이나 냠는 마제바시 디바라들이야 아니 도시네 시와리 내용을 해서 덮친 치다하기 사리
With one's life then being consumed by striving to enjoy pleasures which are brief and transitory and overcoming problems which in reality are insignificant. Quickly one's life is consumed in this way and the end of this life comes. And when the end of this life comes, there's nothing that can then be done. One cannot then delay our death. One cannot even use all our material resources to get the most expensive and the latest medical treatment. When it's time to leave this body, it's time to leave this body. Even if one has a burning desire not to die yet, one's willpower cannot delay one's inevitable death. So for us in the third line, we have this word powerful. So this word powerful here refers to when the time of one's death comes. Those causes that have now leading to the ending of this life are too powerful to overcome. One has to leave this life. This opportunity to cultivate the Dharma, whether one has or has not, is now over.
나는 시로나 ane shina ane 가르치기를네 shina 매바 책이요 말에 제가 매바 마차반사 안직 개와 치마치 개와지 렌루고 그래지래 다 개와 렌루나 개와 렌세들라 원뒤다 안에 진가서다 간저당 안된저서 이마도 매야래 제가 먼저 된저게 규디 대시 개와서야 되래 제가 레레 원게 개와 마사바이나 다 된저게 규디요 말와 제가 매바자 된저리 개요 말에 제가데 안저게 규는 안저게 봐 망보다 사요를 되는데 두신 사요를 되네자 다 되네 가와기 그래서는 지딘 바로 내수 치규나 지딘 바로 봐 바로 시리다 개와 치마 that Maka Gawachim Gidugre, Chitin Paron is Tigu na Parabe, Native Gitugres. The Ansum in there, like Gawalem by Naso, Chitin Paro, the Tedin, Chigawa, Paroba, and Paro Gawachima, Nanson Lati Gidugres, just that the Neza, the Garson, Dindri Gila, Gawagi, you Sayo Marilele, which in the Gawa Madubare. Just that she told you, and the Gawaki Duosen, Gawachima, Manson, Mondol Maki to the edge, Chitin Paron is a chicken. Chitin Paron is a chicken.
So the translation will need to have to be changed a bit, so that what's translated for us in English in the third line, powerful Yama, is part of the second line, but instead of this word Yama, which maybe Tepel can explain later, which here Geshe wants to translate it as death. So to go with the second line, something along the lines of, you will not achieve what you could have when powerful death comes. So something like that. So that has been commented on already. Now the third line, when death comes, then you're led to your next worldly abode. So when death comes, at that point, we are quite helpless in terms of what follows, our next rebirth. Because at the point of death, our opportunity to influence our next rebirth is now over. Now we are under the control of our previously accumulated karma, because it is that and that alone that determines our next death. Not a mere aspiration, not willpower, but the karma that we have accumulated. If laziness has dominated us, if we've spent our life following our desires for pleasures and overcoming problems, procrastinating, engaging in Dharma, or believing that the Dharma is too difficult for someone like me, if that's how we've spent this life, the virtue we will have accumulated is likely to be somewhat limited and weak. Non-virtue accumulated in this or previous lives may well predominate, may well be the most powerful on our continuum. And it's whichever imprint is most powerful on our continuum that at the time of our death determines our next rebirth. Which means if the most powerful imprint on our continuum, whether accumulated in this or lives previous, is non-virtue, we are powerless to prevent ourselves falling into the lower realms, with our very next body being that of a being in the lower realms. So this is what awaits all of us when our death comes. At that point, we are powerless to influence our next rebirth. That then is up to the karma we have accumulated.
Chisa dende ke ta ngansol ma jeba ina, te ki yawde ta ngansol ke tendel ya dunga dang kanga chi dus nyongoyde, dine tabshi dunga seya dang kanga de mate manyoya le tabshi kaya ma, jeya kaya ma le jire, de se nyangan gyurgen ji yu, chisa ngansol ma ki, te ki yawde de se zida, ma ngansol ma ki yewa de se, dine di tendel ya, ane kanga da dunga katsi nyongba ina ya, de 디세 탑람제다 탑람세다 탑시다야 가요 말이지 안디 멤비 마세 안델이야 안데 몽바나 안지 디기 용야기 유기지 개어두에 깔래 하고 싶으레스 제자 디네자 디네기 대세냥은 유게 지자유에서도 제자 냐와를 ngason 마게 ngasol기도 nga손나라 냐와이다 둔로 세드 둥알야 리바 나소 용거래 디네자 둥아 빠도 매번 용을 강가 가지기도 강가 둥아도 코리아 마 녀야마도 세야에게 탑심제야 가야 말이스. 지가 제투게 제야 마 지절 제야가 말이스. 안된 될어야 마오바네 디기 야고 주야 다 된상부 얘기 개위 규사에 뺏갈려 버려서 사투에 긴이 최지에 고급역가 뺏갈려 버려서 디네 제야 고급락 말이스. 지산 대세냥 주야 유리야 지자유선.
The final line, how great will your distress and despair be then? So this particularly draws up the image of someone who is lying on their deathbed. They are very aware that this life is ending and that there is nothing that can be done. they most probably don't even have the willpower to demand of themselves that they remain. But even if they did, they are helpless. The end of their life has now come, and they recognize that this opportunity to transform the trajectory of their future lives is now over. And lying here with these last few days or hours or minutes remaining in this body, one is helpless. One is under the control of one's karma. It and it alone determines where one's next rebirth will be. And at that point, if one looks back on one's life and sees that laziness did dominate, that following the desires of this life, striving to be a mind overwhelmed by this life's problems, then one knows one lost that opportunity, one wasted that opportunity. And if now the lower realms befall one, if one's next body is that of a being in the lower realms, not only will the suffering be intense, but this position of helplessness that one finds oneself in now will continue. Because the lower realms are marked by two general characteristics, that of the intensity of the suffering, and secondly, that one is unable to engage in the Dharma. Even if one were to be around where the Dharma physically is, one lacks the capacity to recognize the Dharma, to understand the Dharma. Therefore, in the lower realms, not only is one suffering intensely, but there's nothing much one can do. One cannot accumulate the causes then to change the trajectory of one's lifetimes. Then one is completely helpless. So this is the position that we may well find ourselves in. When the end of our life comes and we look back with regret, then at that point, our distress and despair will be great.
Andana Karasungorasene, Dadanga Zugi, Wonde Kovan, Kevajan, then you leading top de Vache, top de Hare, Chazan Dading Anzulia, and Jikawa Chima, Nanson Madregi, Tablam de Pai Jevena, Dadija Copiores, and Kewachima, Wonde Kovan, then Yabotop Dindela, and Jinyamlentia, than Tigu to Yaki, Delia, Chitoa, some that Dadi, and the day. Troheke tablam side dade ko yede bares sesan dade ko yede ba susola rawa dade gari kawa dro maro gari chemeji ti gyudi gar sama sosuge rawa yede be yeba de rawa yeba da ji tugu yeba tin keba je gogap dine yebe kabla ane ji dene maje ba che lelo che ane lelo ondo sonje ondo she kewa madu ba du che la ba ina ane nimeji she tourists, she saw by not, and then answer my kid, and also get and do on your ada, and doshin a gangat you gores, the names are doshin sometimes a lilo or to massage, lilo shamo the mother watch, and give each of an yamlu to it, in position the two gores more than anybody.
So the purpose of this verse then is for us now having come to recognize that we have this precious human rebirth, and thereby we have the opportunity to radically transform the stream of rebirths that lie before us. This verse then serves to give us the opportunity to inspire us to shake ourselves free from the stupor of being distracted by today's chores and tomorrow's tasks. All these various activities that consume our energy and consume our time, leaving us without the capacity to engage in the Dharma. This now we take as inspiration to change this habituation and to strive to accumulate the causes. Because this opportunity, as long as we have life and energy within us, we have the opportunity to accumulate causes for further excellent rebirths, to develop the wholesome minds of the Dharma within.
Andine zadang jugi lelo sedi gewe jawa jingye matu be samlo dile jingye matu be samlo shorwa gewa tuye gila do meeting sam jorwa adi lelo sedi se wada jezan dine gi do me le adila je sosu oda le din yel che o sambe sam daje di jae ji do me ba odi nge jonsa mares ne dilaga gewa che tu do me jezan lelo sedi gewe jawa 제기 kaso jingi madu bigi semjung jila lelo sigorda semjung.
Hopefully it's clear what the meaning of laziness is, because it doesn't mean what it generally does in society where it's sitting around doing nothing. What laziness really means is one's wish to engage in the cultivation of the virtuous minds of the Dharma. That wish is quite weak, and it is rather dominated by the desire to engage in this life's various activities, following various pursuits of transient pleasure, a mind dominated by this life's minor problems, as thereby and therefore procrastinating, delaying engaging in the Dharma. So that's what laziness means. It comes down to the wish to engage in the cultivation of the virtuous mind of the Dharma. That wish is very weak.
Denigida kiwe jawan jingi madube samlo di meba suya mayona leya Delia samlo khartang go di samlo ta je nga samlo to ni meba suya ma de shen zi shen da ge zewang da ya da tu ji de ni ji wang chi be ji da ni meba suya de me de ji da samlo da su ge samlo da ni meba suya go da samlo khartang go se ne be na ju gi 제 수림대 그 겨와서 겨와치면 온dio 거방 두개 인규 수림 소야 되게래 수림 되게래 삼다 수림 빼 약을 해도 왔다 수림디 빼 약을 수림 소바에는 니게 제보 겨와정 온dio 거방 두투고 땡땡래 디기 두투고도 제가 강한 먹고 세야다 디기 약을 두투고 되시 수림제 빼 소야 빼 약도 선비게 수림지게 연된 통이야 돼 안될이야 안지 제게 돈이게 뒤바게 해지래 돈이게 연된 통 연대통 아디야 제가 제고도 선비게 돈이게 뒤바게 된 될이야 니 냠는 제야리야 빼 가라나 제데 가와 돈이 뒤바 될이야 가부 삼다야데 빼 야고래 니 제고도 선비 돈이 뒤바게 될이야 안지 가외 삼다야데 대리 준주다 베네 수림수에 또 수림다고 샤바나 수림수에게 수림수와디 연대다 될이야 연대통 대바게 수림라 연대통에 대바게 되네 수림디 송되게 돈이게 뒷바게 되네 될이야 빼 가라라치는 제이그 무디지 삼다야디 준주시고라 제자디 되네게 베네 수림리야 수림수야 수림레 대와 연대통 대바게 될이야 돈이게 뒷바게 대 냠네제게 빼 가라라치 무디지에 삼로죠나 디 준주리 디여반 디 삼로 레바나 난 레로디 고가로 용거 말 진짜 니네잘 고 자와들 배주제 용거를 해제래.
The approach the Dharma takes here to deal with laziness is at first recognizes what laziness is. So it is a consciousness, a mental factor, it's a consciousness, and it comes about, or it's understood as the wish to engage in the Dharma being quite weak, and rather the wish to engage in today's chores and tomorrow's tasks being much stronger. So how does one overcome a particular consciousness? It's to develop a contrary way of thinking, and to overwhelm that with the contrary way of thinking. So to take an illustration, one reflects on ethical restraint, reflecting in particular on the benefits of ethical restraint, thinking, if I develop a truly ethical outlook and thereby my physical behavior is in the constraints of what is ethical, my speech is in the constraints of what is ethical, as is my very way of thinking, then I will be creating powerful causes for further excellent rebirths. So thinking about that a lot, so that desire to be ethical, to train one's mind in ethics, so that wish becomes much stronger than the wish to have a mind distracted by this life's affairs. This is how we overcome laziness. So what it comes down to is we developing where you value a certain way of thinking more than another, where you want something more than something else. And by wanting this new thing, in this illustration, ethical restraint, wanting that way of thinking, wanting that much more than being distracted by various activities, wanting that more, this is what we start to value. This is what we will then prioritize and where we'll put our effort. So therefore, we need to develop, through seeing the qualities of the various minds of the Dharma, we develop a yearning, a zeal to cultivate those within us. Then, that becomes what we value and prioritize, and other things are seen in their truer light. They are seen as insignificant and unimportant.
나디 베나 저기 남시 장모이나다 차워로 잡내나다 난데네게 남시 차와로 심으려나 직 사지질이야 참임지 줘야게 될래야 직 줘야게 되냐게 듬방아 될 도고즈베 듬버 첨보다 될 줘도 슉sem로도 슉sem보 여봐이나 안 될래야 안 차와연에제 안 차와 잡내야데 안 될래야 마셈바제 두고로와 당한 베네 제모를 부로 제모르시네 고 제모들 시우 되직 제게 되고 슉sem보여나 차와 잡나래 아니 지 차와 있나데 디날 제모 제두고 봐 지사디 제마델야 되냐다 되네게 제게 냐 되면 안데 아다디 제메 차와치도 차와치모도와 안데디 로그메데 남시 장모도 캬사라 왔음 누스네 아니고 줘야게 듬발이고 말어 제그 레로셀이야 나 줘야게다 되네 줘야게 되면 말리고라 지사 델라 되냐게 듬바로 집에 소소티 제고도 집에 연대라 통야다 디기 지게 연직 델라 되냐게 듬바 슉첨부 줘봐나 네 그 제게 랑슈기디 제 레가들이야 자와도 좀 거로 된자 디 저기 제모로다 되네 삼당나 되네자 제자 디 레로게 녀보들라 안데 디 기회 자와 두야 기회 자와라 두야 되니기 듬바기야 기회 자와디 연된 통야 안데 될야 안데 될야 거부시야 삼다데 다 존리디다 레로게 녀보 소어디 차고래.
So we can see how this works in everyday life, where when the weather is cold, where the weather is cold and wet, and you yearn for a holiday where it's somewhere warm, you'll do research, you'll save money, and you will go. You'll make your plans because you really want to go and thaw out somewhere warm. Well, likewise, those who enjoy sport, who enjoy playing sport, because of the great enjoyment they take in their sport, no matter the weather, they'll train or they'll compete. The weather will not keep them from going outside and training or engaging in competition. So what we see is where there is something that we deeply desire, that we want. The reason we want it is we value it. We place importance on it. And because we value it, we overcome whatever obstacles there are with relative ease to be able to fulfill these desires. So here in our context, we're trying to shift what we value to being what has actual meaning, what is of true importance for lifetimes to come. And as we change our priorities in this way, it becomes ever easier to let go of all of these chores and tasks that otherwise dominate our time and our energy so. And with far greater ease, we are able to engage in, for example, cultivating an ethical outlook. Then the fourth verse, therefore, reflect on the way in which death comes so quickly, and how after death, like a shadow follows the body, the two types of karma follow. Having contemplated this repeatedly, exert yourself in purifying non-virtue and accumulating virtue.
다제자 디네자 당아주 어디 치와 용거데 마신예랑아 제마디와네 지간 제게 니 개와 죽축을 삼바이나 디네 삼겨 말치 기디 제월서 개와 기디 죽고서는 나데라는 주요 고수고래서 제고래서 그래서네 뉴르도스 치와세데 기디레 해봤어요 말에 세나디 기 망보야래 치기 망보 난기 기 망배 망보 예대 봐서 chiwa de gidile ngeba syo mar tibe kabra namsa legi des le ben jigden dade thangbo yesne bene jigse namshi yuwa chenje and jige lungsu chenbo chasona jene digi xingdo ma rijin de ne jene ya chiwa yongse je za de ne chiwi gendel ya chiyu jig jungwa chu ne yaya da an nangi dosine de kabra le nga khala saya digin susule phe khala dige sawe na khala sada ma de genjin chiwa yongore je za chiwa se de 지 뉴부 교부 용마도 치워 빼글리 제 영향 유네 말했어. 제가 기티칭 해봐 요 말에 기티 교불이에요. 제가 디네삼 오다 당하디 마시니엘 제마된 마시니엘 gel리gel리 제축을 삼바데 디스 삼는게 딱요 말 디파 디 데네게 마제 파라딜리 시소는 빼사기를 경험하고 그래서 제가 이제 다들 하는 소수게 개와 강투도 두고 그래서 제가 디 시와데 기딜레 야 말다 삼당당 갈당서 오데 시위 게임 망보여다 시와데 기딜레 야 말다 되네가 지게 매와자다 니 다데네야 개와지 마두바는데 배사사레 선배 삼다제네 개와주에 배수시고래서 대시 뉴도 시비 수삼신세.
Looking at the first line, therefore reflect on the way in which death comes so quickly. So we live with this misapprehension that we have extensive time ahead of us. And this, if we think about it intellectually, it's very easy to recognize that this is completely deluded. Because it's not only that death will come for us, but it can come at any time. And we know this from what we've observed in our families or in society, that all too often the young die before the old, the healthy before the ill. It's not at all possible to say with certainty who amongst us will be the first to die. And this is because our body, our life, is so very vulnerable. It just takes a small cause and this life can end. Accidents are the most obvious. But even just a fall, it may end our life or radically change our life. Or similarly, eating something that it turns out you have an allergy to, or the elements inside our body going out of harmony, an illness, perhaps a fatal illness befalling us. This can come about so quickly. And this is something that is imperative, an understanding that is imperative to live with, because it serves to overcome procrastination. Because you recognize, my time here, not only is it finite, but it could be very brief. Therefore, I need to take care of my mind from right now and continuously keep my mind on virtue, away from non-virtuous or afflicted ways of thinking. Because this could be my last month, my last weekend, and so forth. Therefore, from right now and continuously from right now, I need to take care of my mind, living as if this is the end of my time in this body.
도신 삼대게 어두고레스 제산데 마두바네 시송바네 시네 류기한테 시조도 같이 그랬으네 시네 류기지서 디마신 레제 레니 장와 양나 양도 섬 양네 양다 양도 섬스데 제자당도 시도도 아네 시네 류기 제수 디마신 시도 안주기 류기 수부 디마셔와 제산 안주 수부도 가와 저번에 가와던 디마데 디가 용고레 마도 수부디 디마데 파샤체 아네 수부디 파 drone dimade yasha to yaskayo marwas jeza da dimase de kho du mer se de ngazu subu kho drone di le ngure se ngadu de la de dimna de le ngurwa nim pasun pa de dimna le ngurwa jeza ji su jeza ngazu gu subu gi dimna dimase de dimna de se ngurwa di lu kho drone ngazu lu de kho drone di nyam du res ma de lu di me na ma do wala drone an dimade ba sha to yo mare je le di na shin 아니 가서 시디 갑라 가르치수 당투고 그래서네 레니 있으래 레 개벨에다 미기벨이 있었어 당고래 제자당 가서 시디 저디 가르쳐 정도 수부디 바샤샤샤고 그래서 수부자다 셈니 줘 그래서 셈디 줘야지 다 류줘와 나신 디마줘와 나신 진 가서 개벨에디 gewe le gi jesu sa yue na gewe le de shuk chemo na di jesu ta je dendro ya zho ya da ne mi gewe le gi shuk chemo na di gi jesu ta de na ngan rol ma zho ya cha go je sa le je ni gi jesu ta ne le gewe le sa na dendro ya zho na mi gewe le sa na ne ngan rol ma zho ya di gewe di ni gi jesu ta go res je sa de ne enza ngan ju ge on du shi ne da shi ne and lu ti ma lu gi jesu ta wa na shi nga zo shi du ne and dendro zho re ngan zho re sa di zho ya di ga ri jin zho re sa na le gewe le da mi gewe le gi to pi zho re gewe le mang bo shuk chi ma sa na di to gi dendro le ya zho re and then mi gewe le to che sa na di to gi ne ma son ma zho re je re
Lama Tsongkhapa continues, and how after death, like a shadow follows the body, the two types of karma follow. So not only will death come for all of us, but it could come at any time. And when death comes, our body remains here, but our consciousness continues. This body that we've occupied throughout this life, we all know that wherever we go, our shadow follows us. We cannot will our shadow away. It's not something we can choose to have or not. As long as we have a body, we have a shadow. And similarly, when this body is left behind and our consciousness continues, it remains accompanied by our karma. And then, too, we cannot will away our negative karma. What's accumulated will follow us, will accompany our consciousness. And it's our collection of imprints, both what we brought into this life and what we've accumulated in this life. It's those that both determine our next rebirth, whether it's in the higher realms and in what context, or in the lower realms and what type of rebirth, as well as determining the various conditions we have in our life. This karma, both virtuous and non-virtuous, accompanies us from life to life.
Chisa dinigi yando samdangore, yando samdangore, chisa karasang torasna digwa cheba ina, and ngansole kiruguri, Sibepena, the Kasan, Shubanaji, Due Cha, Kondro, Ngaya, and Je Tado, Jelle Nibe, Samba Kebaina, Samno Dinis Kebaina, Digi Leanga Basach, and Digi Tebu, and Mamba Kawakis, Nansole Baki to Gores. Tesa Dinis that Nansol Kebana, Dunga, Tesa Nansole, Kiam, Sosu, Drag, Dova Mebaza, Di, and Audizu gave a Nansol Kiki, Chesa Dinesa, Dilega, some of the Tankyo Mare, some Paka, Uresia. Then Gawa Kivili, that has not Shubanaje, she's not Lunga using to be Sudum Soban, Digi, and Dendriki Gore. Tizada, Manzuki, Chimbinium and Jevana, Dendriki Dendelia, King of the Dendelia, Mahomba Dendel, Kawakeva, Dendelia, Lonchu, Gamma Basaya, the Neo Gamma Shungore, no Sevo Combaina, Ombo Sawada, and Chiga daughter Demba, Denuyada, and the Junju Sombaina, Dendelia, Yamneche, Cheche, Yaya, Lucy Govia, Goragores, Duchin, this is some done, Tanu. Chisada, Tsujumson, Chimba, Sevacom, Zendri, some, the name Monamiataba, Tushina, and the Dendri Dendelia, and the Digi to Yata, the nigger Punso, you want to go recipe. The nigger, some dido. Chisayane had some dacity, Lake Villa, the Migi Ligi, Jebutilla, the Givile Sana Carriore, Migi Sana Carriores. Chisa Migi is the Carriores and that Migi Sana National Key Tours. And I saw Gina Carriosna, or Dunga Patumeba, Kanga Mongoya, Kanga say a Tablamio Mares. Chisadi, and then George Coragio Mares. Chisan Deleta, yeah, Midwas. Tema Javasa that Tibili Chick Midu some time. Chinadana, Givili Sabana Carrios, and Givili Saban, Deletine, and then Wondioko the key wood. Then Della, Digi to your Dunga Kanga, Kanga say to and she Ducian and Yamlenche of Riores. And did Yahweh Tonde and Delicate water del Mongbon and Delicate to Achins. The Henzangi gave it out to Kinsibi. Ducian sometime what is it? Leni Java Yana and some Chisan Kivi Leda, Miki Lake, Chesu charging us on the general TV, Diniki 김세대기 봐 삼다지 야네 양도 삼다이도 되네 개와지 제 돈이 둠바데 숙셔지 개와 쪽에 리고래 되네 미개와지에 삼도 어디 야고 민도 선배 균통나 디를 균통나 디치기가 말이지 제가 되고 말이지 진짜 두시네서 야네 양도 삼당 거래서 됐어 이번 로메 레니 자와 야다 야네 삼세지 봄
So this, as is said in the third line, needs to be contemplated repeatedly. So what needs to be contemplated completely is has various components. So firstly, one needs to come to be very clear for oneself what is meant by virtue or wholesome ways of thinking and non-virtue or unwholesome ways of thinking. So non-virtue refers to afflictions and their motivated speech and physical behavior. So, as mentioned last night, afflictions such as attachment, anger, jealousy, pride, and so forth. And so these, if they ripen, if the karma they create ripens at the time of death, will lead to rebirth in the lower realms. If they ripen during one's life, they lead to suffering. So thinking about this, one comes to the determination to restrain one's mind from the afflictions, and if they arise, to not act under their influence. And then as the companion to this, one thinks about virtue. So these are the wholesome minds we spoke about yesterday. Minds such as ethical restraint, which has the ripening effect of leading to an excellent rebirth, again, such as a human being. As well as generosity, which has the ripening effect of having an abundance of material conditions. And the virtuous mind of patience that leads to one having a pleasing physique, excellent sense faculties, and easily getting on well with others. And then fourthly, that of joyous perseverance, where one takes delight in engaging in virtue. One seeks out the Dharma, wanting to become an ever more virtuous person. So here one reflects then on the benefits of such minds and commits to training in them, having them become one's a natural way of being. So this then is what we need to think about repeatedly over a sustained period, recognizing what is virtuous and what is not, and their results that will follow, leading to a determination to become a person whose mind is dominated by virtue, and for whom the afflictions are very weak.
규제 사반의 지후대 연구레스 되네 도신 디바제반의 되네 연구레 개와사반의 개와사반의 안도스 제보된 연구레스 되네 야네 양도 도신의 삼단 예수디게 자고시 삼는단 심주치에 하고와시 되네 하고르다 소수기 단 개와 리케벨레 사나 야가다 미기벨레스는 누가 약도 하고네 다징아도 잘라 마선 뒤로 하던 요아도도 즉 약도도 하고나 즉 야가 담그려와 누가 어디 바샤셔로 그래서 한 먹어봐나 아니 어디 미 따도 인지도 어디 약도서 계르고 와 맞아 약도 한 먹어봐네 안디 너도 용서요 그래서 되네서 직버지게로 가서 삼다나디 삼나다나 약도디 삼나디 당반에 몽반에 약고요 용고요 받아 하고 다 삼나 데니스코반에 몽반에 누구요 강아요 받아 하고나 삼나 야도니 예와다 하고 토바나 되는 가서 야가데 담그러와 어두스네 야네 야도 삼다 되는 자다 삼다제 같이 왔으면 딕장 개와살라 그버지 시도지자 디바자야다 네 개와사발이야 네 급주 배 가오 가신 구비고네 네 배수제제 네 배준유제제 네 개와사고 그래서 디바디 파샤고 그래서
Yeah, this what is virtuous and what is non-virtuous and why so is what one needs to reflect on repeatedly over a sustained period, so that we come to value the side of virtue and we start to become repelled by the side of non-virtue. In other words, when the virtuous minds are dominant within us, this feels right, this feels who we want to be. But when the afflictions arise, we immediately feel an aversion to what is happening within, and we want to reduce those minds. And this comes about through changing our preference, in changing what we prefer. This comes from reflecting on the benefits of one group and the faults of the other. So just like in your own life, if you have two things, and one you find more attractive, more pleasing, and the other a little bit ugly or doesn't feel so nice, you'll always tend to use the one and not the other. Or if there's something perhaps something you eat, and you find this beneficial but that harmful, or this tastes nice, that doesn't, it's very clear you'll always go to the one side and push the other away. This is what we try to do here through contemplating the two types of karma repeatedly. And when one has done so successfully, or maybe not in that sequence, as one is doing so successfully, one will, in now the fourth line, exert oneself ever more in purifying non-virtue and accumulating virtue. So as one is going through this process of repeatedly reflecting on the benefits of virtue, the faults of non-virtue, and what is meant by virtue and non-virtue, as one is accumulating this understanding and the resulting determination, becomes ever easier to strive in the accumulation of virtue and the purification of non-virtue.
Andine zan diba chang kewa tukore kewa sa kore se de diba chang diba se di sangi gi odini chebe na lega samno di khobe na ma lega ti cheba da ma ba na dunga ji yong jebu dunga ki gi se song yong ba za deni ge sangi song bi gi da jang zo khong se nga zo khong ge da de so ma di diba cha kore diba thong khong yo ma ba de gi diba re so 지단 디마 장고를 세디 매바서 그래서 녀마양아 줄에 깨되어봐이나 깨차와이나 디 매바서 그래서 근데 마음반 깨디게 깨 매바 양게 사바 깨 매바서야다 니마 깨심바디게 매바서야 되라 근데 디바 장와서 다 개와 사세디 개와디 사르당 잘라사디 직녀야 직사 직녀는 망부를 루루치데 망부 차이로와 직녀 니녀시 망부 차이로 디나신 개와 사세도 다들 안 하지길라 개와 뉴마도 매바이네 개와 두에디 차르직 주 니주 숨로 된도시 안에 야도도 개와디 뉴버체지로 싸고 그래서 디네기 개와디 뉴버체 땅고 해서 왔다 진짜 디바 장서 디바디 냐마 디바 제셔야 되게 봐 샤야 당 마오바사도 개마주 봐 가야 디바 장 개와 사시디 냐마 개와 사셔게 예바네 개와디 야 공배도 다야 자 개와 사바 마제바디 사바 제셔도 부도시 사야도 개와 제여도 되네 개와디 봐 마마마마 또 뉴버체 주고 그러와 제가디 도시네 개와디 뉴버체 땅고 그래서 왔다 디바 장다 개와 사셔야 돼.
So in the fourth line, exert yourself in purifying non-virtue. So this has a twofold meaning. First, the non-virtue that one both recalls having accumulated in this life, as well as what one does not recall from this or lives previous. One commits to purifying that through various purification practices to eradicate that from our continuum, or at the very least to prevent it from ripening. So that's the one component of purifying non-virtue. The other is the commitment to refrain from accumulating new non-virtue. So one closes the door to further non-virtue as well as purifying past misdeeds. And the line concludes with, and accumulating virtue. So this also has two parts. So just like if you are going to the shops, you may buy something you don't have. So something you don't have at all, you buy that something brand new for you. Or if there's something you collect, you now buy something further to add to your collection. So this is similar then to the two parts of accumulating virtue, where those skills those virtuous qualities you already have, you add to them, you strengthen them, you make them more ingrained, more powerful within you. And those virtuous qualities which you don't yet have in a very strong way, those you accumulate anew. So then these are the two aspects of accumulation, strengthening what one already has familiarity with and building familiarity with new virtuous qualities.
디베장 개와사시 삼단제 디베장다 개와사 삼단데 제가 당한 삼로세디 베스메스 유니버챔보슈 차디어와 제네 잡변에 하나 주기 류 나게 자와 차상 아주 삼류 톤에 두고 봐. 삼류 마다나 요것이야 차 용고 봐. 빼는 수 셈다 삼류 나려야 지기 삼류야 신뢰 팬배 삼바다 신뢰야 가위 제외 삼바 쉬베나 디기 슈긴기에는 류기 넘규디네 빼지 닝지 직 숨다유 하다 약고려야 아니 바지 믹디기네 빼지 다산이야 닝지 어째 통하로 파저 밀이야 가라라야 이게 삼 수배 넘규차야 네 기시 나디네 직 약고려 차야 시공도와 디쳐서 삼류기니 리도와 아니 야 지금 삼로들이야 파저들 마가와당 코로다 지금 미가위기 남 삼로들 되니 코로서네 되니 동거라지 아직 때리네 직 파셔들이 미통에 되는 기우면 해서다 되니 미디기에나 됐 제게 대보면 통되는 베스 시나리오 되게 기대 되네식 지산 디그 류기 넘겨 칸이 봐 셰베네 식디게나 파쇼 고디가를 빼 마기어서야게 직수로 거야 제자디 삼류톤의 류기 넘겨당 나게 자와디기 샤살 유로와 다야 삼나려야 가야 마삼바제 되니기 가위 삼바다 미게웨 삼바다 가야 마삼바네 두스되레베네 아 지기 파셔 통에 두스토데 나지 니칼라나 계체 메 마가게 메로와 아주 그 단념으로 삼나도 코토부미도 제자 디메바디 가서 삼로 나로려 가위기 삼로 숙첨보에메 아니 그 체위기 마게웨 삼로 숙첨보에 삼로 코나 바마 단념으로 지어봐도 수비 넘규디에 파셔디 되니 통이고라 제자 삼로 빼 마시기 뉴버첨보래 제자 삼로디 제자 당 안주기 제자 디니 인자 삼로 개외 삼로 숙첨보 지어봐는 안주 류가 넘규 유아 나신 개와 치마데 야가들 파 땅투고래 개외 미기외 삼로 숙체부 지어봤네 미게 삼로디게 아주 류가 유아 나신 아주 개와 치마데 아니 두아질 당고래 제자 디니에서 삼로디 빼마세 개치모 주차고 제자데 디바장 개와 사세디 아주 삼로 땅제 개와 사야르마도 그 삼로 땅제 개와 사야디 디바지라신에 장고 그래 제자 디바장야라 개와 사나마도 디바장하메래라
When we talk about purifying non-virtue and accumulating virtue, hopefully what is becoming very clear is that this is referring not primarily to what one does and how one speaks, but primarily to one's way of thinking, to ensuring that our mind is virtuous, that our mind becomes purified of non-virtuous ways of thinking, our mind refrains from non-virtuous ways of thinking. This is the very meaning of purifying non-virtue and accumulating virtue. The very meaning is changing our way of thinking. And changing our way of thinking, certainly whilst we are starting to train, tends to be a little artificial. It's something that we are intentionally having to contrive, something we're intentionally having to manufacture within ourselves. But by training repeatedly over a sustained period, what was for perhaps quite a while contrived eventually becomes natural to us, becomes very much who we are. So what we are wanting to cultivate, for example, is a mind that naturally wants to be of benefit to others, a mind that naturally likes others, so that it becomes a reflection of who you are as a person. And to the extent that one develops this, in particular, when it really becomes part of who you are, you'll get on with everyone. People will enjoy your company. When they see you coming or hear your voice, they'll be pleased to see you. They'll enjoy being around you. And that is because of the quality of mind you have accumulated. Because the quality of your mind doesn't only impact you. It's the quality of your mind that determines how you speak, how you act. Not merely what you do and what you say, but how you speak, how you act. And this, therefore, others pick up on, and therefore either enjoy being in your presence, or the converse is also true, want nothing to do with you. So here, I want to emphasize just how important our way of thinking is, because it's become now quite common knowledge in society that our way of thinking impacts our physical health. So this is quite widely understood, that if our mental health is quite poor, this will have an impact on our body. That is very much the case, and it has, therefore we see our way of thinking has an impact in this very life. But so too, through the karma we accumulate, our way of thinking impacts our body in the future life. In that, it's a way of thinking, whether virtuous or non-virtuous, that leads to the accumulation of karmic imprints that propel a particular type of rebirth, as well as the various qualities that one has in that rebirth. So this shows just how important our way of thinking is. In this life, if we develop a mind that is truly loving and caring for others, a mind that is truly ethical, this will transform ourselves and our relationships with others. So I want to emphasize again that when you hear about purification and accumulation, this does not refer to verbal and physical deeds, but the motivating mind that leads to those verbal and physical deeds. Therefore, this is where we should put our attention.
제가 당 안주기 가르삼 거라서는 아다 지강아 셈 마기와 강아 시치도 아다티 사지들 두기면서 샹다지 조샤기스네 샹다지 사지들 조샤 샹다지 조나 강아데 세주 그래서 배강아데 매바 차주가 선배 삼다지네 안시 샹다 직사지 샹다 부엔 조베네 야데 강아데 다가라 가서 삼로 들려요 봐 가라 제 강아 체르마도 님이 찍니스데 사지 사버데 남야라 차지 됐 강아 중어도 그래 되네야 빌리지네 아제 강아데 장자리 그래 안디 멤버가 가시 가서 무슨 심 강아데 강아세 삼로 당당한 톤에 강아세 한 먹어져 되네 아니 지금 아주게 지금 빌면세당 지금 동야릭도 바동주데 두두시는 시에도 강아세게 삼제 두시에도 다디니게 사람도 내가 빌려 빌면 나라 지창하라 또는 거기 뉴버디게 잼바를 매와 수여시네 되네 강아데도 마용하지 용거를 때 야디 뉴버디 예도데 야야 강아들이 내용거래 제자대 강아세 탑람디 다다 채고 말해 제자대 디네에서 당 안주기 셈리아 마기바 강아디 용요도가라 델야 가는 용구스베 삼로스타데 디 고해 탑람디 삼로스타 소수기 삼로타네 직강아세 샤바네 디네 가와 되베네 강아세 투예시래 아니 가와 지금 메인다 디네 시멘다 삼모다 디네 그one 강아셈이 강아디 세미톤에 삼다 강아세 뭐데 맨주시제 강아세 투예 갈래 가버래 나 수볼이야 마로다 나네나서 레베나 디즈야 삼다제 강아세데 갈래 가버래 강 마이베네가 딜바페 수볼에 맨주시에다 조도야다 디스이네 코디 바베식 제제네 마도 삼다제 디 강아세 투예 가고로 지산 삼류 코네 강아체디 삼로랑 다제네 지고 디 독초 님보 삼로지 다제 강아세 오차고래 지상은 디바세야지 삼로단에 되어 콘트롤 가게 되니게 삼로디 디바데 디세야야 나가주 삼로 현다지 단지 기위 삼로 단지 바장고 그래서 그래
As Buddhist practitioners, we should be very clear that practicing the Dharma means training our mind, and it's through training our mind that we will come to transform how we experience our life. Because all too often, when people are unhappy, they naturally want to remove themselves from a situation. And certainly in circumstances, this needs to be done. But one doesn't resolve one's problems merely by removing oneself from a situation. Because if one is, for example, having a disharmonious relationship with someone, when one removes oneself from that situation, your way of thinking accompanies you. And those ways of thinking will be acted out in new relationships elsewhere. So if one's unhappy in one place, decides I've had enough, I'm moving to another country, sometimes maybe that's necessary. But be aware, one has to change one's way of thinking because the same habit patterns that one has accompanies you wherever you go. You cannot outrun your mind and your imprints. And moreover, in order to deal with life's challenges, people will rely on various things to soothe their mind. It may be eating, it may be intoxicants, drinking something, it may be medication. These two all have an impact. They help soothe the mind. They may dull the mind, but they do not solve anything. So we need to keep training our mind, because this will, through training our mind, we will radically transform how we experience the world, how we experience everything we encounter. And this transformation is something that we all have the capacity to do. So for example, when one is physically ill, to think, oh, I change my mind and I'll heal, to be honest, that's kind of unlikely. Take medicine, follow the course of treatment that one is prescribed by a skilled physician, but don't leave it at that. Use this and everything you encounter as opportunities to train your mind, to cultivate, to transform your mind. Because if one is ill and one is taking medication, but one is also changing one's mind, the medication will serve to heal one's body, but your mental training will serve to transform how you experience your illness. So this is an illustration to take to every single aspect of our life. Use it as stimulus to change our mind, to transform your mind. And this is the very meaning of Buddhist practice.
āndā dīkpa chāng kēwā sā sēdi kāna chīgō rē sēne, dā ngā zui dīkpa chāng, dīkpa sī pīna ngā zui kōntō sēdi, ngā zui kōntō shēn lē kī kōntō sēdi dīkpa chā dī rō wā. Dā dī mā chāng yā lē kēwā sā gō rē sēne, dā kāra sā gō rē sēne, chām zē sām dā, shēn lē chām bā dā, zē wē sām dā bā nā, dī kī sām lō dī, chām zē dē sām lō kā zē shūk shī chak dā bā nā, shēn lē kōntō sā kī sām lō dī yung gō mā rō wā, kōntō kī sām lō dī yung gō mā rō, dā kōntō sāwā kī yō mā rē, nye mā kī kōntō samlō tāndi nūpa rō samlō nā rō yō bā nē, dī nūpa dī chōng rō wā rē. Dā yā jī kāng zō kī xiān lī nūpi kī sāmbā, xiān lī sim chēn sō chō yā dā, xiān lī zūn xie kō hōr tā yā dā, xiān kī chā lā kū yā samlō dī kāng zō kī mī kē wā rō wā, jī sā xiān kī chā lā kū hū dō, xiān sō hū dō, xiān lī kāng dī nūpa chē hū sāmbā samlō dī, nē chē wē sāmbā, dī mī kē wā chā kō rō wā. Jī sā dī mā chāng kō rē sā. 다 디장야를 개화 사고래서 개화 가르 사고래서 오늘 류가 있음 요건에 현재 뇌비 자와 지금에 현재 소주기 섭취 소주 지금에 현재 준식임에 현재 잘라지 꾸먹고메 아 선비 디니게 삼로데 야네 야 따도 디 아는 저기 개화 사서 디니 개화 사도 디니게 현재 뇌비 자와의 체외 자와 지금에 선비 삼로 가지 숙체 자는 디기 이긴이 현재 체외 삼로 단 뇌바 제 현재 소주비 삼로지 사바기에 디가래 용을 차고래 제가 녀마디와 디니게 삼로기 뇌버로 제베네 뇌바디마 총도 거래 베나가도 슈울롬버로 시나 다 슈우딜 추 루메 롬버 수기메 삼네 거 사바가 녀마게 롬버 차 되셔베네 니말 되셔베네 거 감도로 아디나시 녀마가도 콩러사 현재 체외 삼바 시여베네 뇌버로 삼로나 바샤 뇌버로 제베네 다다가도 루시네 어디샬랑에 뇌베 체기메 아 제가도 가상 슈반 수림 소야 돼. 류가 유스미 요가 샬란네 봐서 싸우기네 지금에 삼백에 두시네 삼다에도 딘 삼데 안에 야도 기디네 데네 삼 코여도 녀마기 데네 디바 차셔바 되게 봐 누가 총쇼의 장로 거래. 진짜 사바 디바 사바래 데니게 샬라 체위기와 삼라데 기교 말이. 제자 디바 차야데 개와 사고 때 구바제. 빼 야보래 디 데네 제도네 야보도 와서 비 가다 가와당 구비고 토네 개와 삼다. 장어서 빼선수나 네 그소리 잼비 점지게 삼을 야네 저한테 현래 판별 삼을 야네 야도 다야 류가 있으면 그네 샬란도가 지금에 선배 삼을 야네 다야 then Anzuki Hasan Shuba Nigeria, that Luma use Mukone Shanlia, Roger, Pemba come to the doings and be some time, Tisu Gawa Sabas, didn't get some Yane, Yando Yandan, Gawa Sabare, didn't give us Sardu, didn't deeper Shanley be somebody you chon Droya, and Jelia, Basic Union Goria, and the Save somebody new Droya, Shan Dusine. Check just a debate is Jang said to see some diet. The got gave us our debate by Jang and I did get Conro down, Jamze something you do short. She's not Jamze is some cassette down when they could conjure somebody new chun to it. Then I shall never cheat me and be soon as somebody do short and let's have some of the she done never cheat me and never cheat me and be Jamze to some time, save somebody around Shugi and called new chun to it. Sarana, Tawayana, download Dajan, download Shushi, the Tawa the Chunju Ruda. She's not download search of any digit Damo Yuvena, Tawa the Shushi, the Damo the Chunju Ruda, Dinashi Chihuahua. She's not the Dibajan Kawasa said, Lucinek, Kasan Shuba, some Dusu Yana, young Daya did it.
These two terms, non-virtue and virtue, or purifying non-virtue and accumulating virtue, these are often presented separately, and they often are trained in separately. But in reality, they are interrelated, or that they have they're interrelated. In that, for example, how does one go about purifying non-virtue? It is to accumulate virtue. So if one is wanting to purify the non-virtue of the mind of anger, so that what one's trying to purify is a consciousness. And this, in this illustration, is one of anger. And one then does so by strengthening one's habituation to a contrary and opposite, virtuous way of thinking, such as affectionate love. Because when one's mind is angry, love is not at all dominant. When one is feeling affectionate love for others, one cannot become angry. So these two have, because they are contrary, if you become much more habituated to one, the other is overwhelmed. So a person who's naturally angry is easily angered. For them, training repeatedly in affectionate love, because it's a opposite mind, this will have an impact on how easy it is for the anger to arise, or if it does, it won't last nearly as long. Because this process of purification and accumulation means that as one strengthens one's way of thinking to a particular virtuous way of thinking, it proportionately weakens the opposite, non-virtuous way of thinking. So when one comes to engaging in specific purification practice, this has various components. One of the components is to recall, if it's anger, specific instances of anger. And then one generates regret for that. And this is important, because then by generating regret, one is closing the door to the likelihood of anger arising as easily, because one is making it ever clearer to oneself. I was suffering when I was angry. I created the causes to suffer in the future. And in this way, one regrets how one thought, and therefore what one said and what one did. And that, in terms of regret, is sufficient to not allow the self-indulgence of dwelling with guilt and allowing oneself to be ravaged by guilt. This serves no purpose at all. Generate regret, and then cultivate a contrary, virtuous way of thinking. And that is how one purifies past misdeeds and builds habituation to wholesome ways of thinking. So again, with the illustration of love, we all have love within us. We just need to moisten it, like dry soil. If you add some water, the sprout will grow. So by nurturing the seeds of love that abide within us, this will grow ever more, ever stronger, and thereby anger will start to become more of a stranger to us. And so too, if one recognizes one's habituated to perhaps unkind speech or unskillful behavior, there one needs to train in ethics, developing this strong liking for ethics, seeing its values, and also seeing the faults of speaking or acting in a particular way and the motivating mind behind that. And by training again repeatedly over a sustained period, one's habituation will change. So in the same way that on warm days, we rely on something that's the opposite to deal with the heat, such as air conditioning, so too we're dealing with our mind. By cultivating the contrary, wholesome, virtuous minds, we proportionately weaken the non-virtuous ways of thinking we are thus far habituated to. Then thank you. We'll conclude there for this morning. Thank you.